Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, April 7th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers could be tipping their hand ahead of the 2025 NFL Draft. I'm Josh Yourish, and I'm going to jump into what I think would be a massive mistake for the Steelers in the first round this month in Green Bay. And it starts with a report yesterday from the Athletic's Dane Brugler that Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe has accepted an NFL draft invite to Green Bay. And speaking of Green Bay, I'm going to do my best not to mention that specific quarterback's name, who spent some time in Green Bay and spent some time somewhere else and maybe spending some time in Pittsburgh. I'm going to do my best not to mention his name today because I'm tired of the waiting game. I just want an answer so we can go from there. So, Aaron Rodgers, I'm going to try not to say that guy's name today because I just don't know what else I could say about it. Hopefully a resolution is coming. There's speculation that the resolution is coming on Wednesday night when Pat McAfee has his live show in Pittsburgh, and maybe Aaron Rodgers is going to come out and say, I'm a Steeler now, but maybe he's going to be in, I don't know, Egypt again. Who knows with that guy? So let's deal in some draft speculation today. Let's deal in the possibility either that Rodgers will be a Steeler or he won't. It doesn't really change this report and what it could mean for the Steelers. Previously, Fox's Jordan Schultz, don't get into a confrontation with him in a Starbucks, reported that the NFL is only inviting about 8 to 10 players who the league considers top picks to the draft to avoid a Will Levis situation with a player stuck in the green room. We know this happened to Will Levis. We know this happened to Geno Smith years back, and I believe it happened to Joey Porter Jr. as well, who was ultimately the top pick of the second round to the Steelers. So Milroe gets a draft invite. It's unclear, at least to me, I've done digging on this, if this is a normal first round in the green room draft invite, but it appears to be. And this set off alarm bells for me personally because there was some talk early in the season, last season, when Milroe knocked off Georgia and looked great in that game, that maybe he would be the number 1 overall pick. And then that faded considerably as he kind of struggled in a new offense under Kalen DeBoer and struggled as a pocket passer, which is something that we know is the case with Milroe. He's a great deep ball thrower. He's an excellent athlete. But there's a lot of development that still needs to happen for Jalen Milroe to be an NFL quarterback. So it seemed he was clearly going to be a mid-round guy, a day 2, maybe even day 3 guy. And he was certainly on the Steelers' radar, right? The Steelers hosted Milroe for dinner at Alabama's Pro Day. So there's interest there. Nobody really expected that interest was first round interest, was number 21 overall interest. But now that Milroe gets the draft invite, it appears to indicate that he's going to be off the board in round 1. And the Steelers in recent years, yes, some of these were under Kevin Colbert, but have been guilty of telegraphing their first round pick. Everyone knew the Steelers were taking Najee Harris. There was no mystery there. It was a bad pick when it happened. Everyone knew it was going to happen, and it did. It became pretty clear heading into the draft that the Steelers were going to take Kenny Pickett in the first round. And now a lot of people are connecting the dots between the Steelers and Milroe because of this invite to Green Bay. And to me, if the Steelers drafted Jalen Milroe in the first round, and yes, this is massive speculation, but I feel like it's worth talking about because the Steelers need a quarterback, regardless of what happens with that man who spent a lot of time in Green Bay. And Milroe's an option now. It appears that Milroe's a first-round option now. So we have to evaluate it as if the Steelers could be drafting Jalen Milroe in the first round. And to me, that would be a massive mistake. He's a fantastic runner. And that 11-man run game, as we've seen with other quarterbacks in the NFL, can give you a very real offensive floor if you're willing to utilize that skill. The Steelers weren't willing to do that with Justin Fields. Now, maybe it's a slightly different situation because you were concerned about Fields going down with Russell Wilson starting the year injured. And then by the time, Wilson got healthy, he took over the job. But the Steelers did not get the most out of Justin Fields' athleticism. And I don't believe that they would get the most out of Jalen Milroe's. If Tomlin is hyper cautious about Milroe turning the ball over, he's not going to work. Right? I think it was an interesting video that I saw recently, just this past week. Ben Johnson was talking with the new head coach of the Chicago Bears, formerly the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, was talking with the media in Chicago about, kind of the most important and telling stats in the modern NFL. And Johnson was adamant that the passing game EPA, expected points added, is the most important statistic now for determining the outcome of games. And he said it was previously turnovers. And I can guarantee you that Mike Tomlin disagrees with Ben Johnson on that point, and Mike Tomlin believes that it's still turnovers. That was what hamstrung Justin Fields and the Steelers' offense when he was the quarterback, a fear of turning the ball over. And Fields did a good job not turning it over, but that's not the end-all be-all because it limited what the Steelers could do in the passing game. And if you're going to play that way with Jalen Milroe, a volatile player, a project as a prospect, and if you're going to potentially consider drafting him in the first round, you're going to have to play him pretty early because that's just what happens with first-round quarterbacks unless they're drafted to Green Bay. And to get the best passing game EPA out of a player like Milroe, who is unrefined as a passer and fairly rigid for as great of an athlete as he is, he's fairly rigid in terms of moving through his progressions and also creativity with arm angles and throwing slots. And if you're going to maximize a player like that, somebody like maybe Jalen Hurts comes to mind, though Milroe now is a better athlete than Hurts. You need to be willing to push the ball down the field. And Mike Tomlin's not going to do that with a young quarterback. Mike Tomlin is not going to let a player like Milroe, if that's where the Steelers go, push the ball down the field, which is his best attribute as a passer. He throws a good deep ball. Really good deep ball. And with Pickens and Metcalf on the outside, I actually do think potentially a Jalen Milroe-led Steelers offense could be successful. But I don't believe that the head coach and the infrastructure in place and the incentive structure with what the head coach believes is most important from his quarterback would be the right environment to develop a guy who is such a project. Tomlin, in recent years, we've learned this as the Steelers have been in this holding pattern at quarterback and looking for the ultimate replacement for Ben Roethlisberger, a process that's they're still undergoing. Tomlin has often obsessed about quarterback mobility. And maybe that's part of the connection between the Steelers and Milroe that a lot are making. But when Tomlin talks about it, it's not just in terms of running the ball, but it's also sack avoidance and extending plays. And while Milroe was much better last season, I think he cut his pressure to sack rate down to about 15%. In 2023, this is a quarterback that had a 30% pressure to sack ratio, despite all his physical gifts. His pocket awareness is not very is, I won't say non-existent, but it's not developed. And his mobility and athleticism doesn't necessarily translate in the ways Tomlin will be hoping, especially because he's rigid as a thrower. So I don't think he throws outside of the pocket particularly well. I don't think he's particularly creative outside of the pocket, except as a runner. So for a player like Milroe to reach the ceiling of what that offense could be, his play caller would need to use the 11-man run game to his advantage, right? Use that numbers advantage. And the best way to do that is out of the shotgun. And we know Arthur Smith is in love with his under center play action stuff. So I just think it would be a bad fit from a developmental environment, a bad fit from an offensive play caller perspective, and potentially a bad fit in terms of timeline, because this is a quarterback that needs time to develop. And if you're drafting him in the first round, especially if Mason Rudolph is your starting quarterback going into the year, you're going to rush him out there. And I think it would be potentially disastrous for the Steelers to do so. I'm interested in Milroe in the mid rounds. That's probably not going to happen because the Steelers traded out of their second round pick for DK Metcalf. And to do that, to give up premium draft capital for a 27-year-old wide receiver, not that that's old, but a veteran wide receiver that you then pay a big contract to, and then draft a quarterback who's very raw, who is a project, a multi-year project just months later, that's wildly incongruent from a team building perspective. So I struggle to get there with this, and maybe it is just speculation, and maybe there's not really that much to it, and that's fine. Then I spent 13 or so minutes of this podcast talking about Jalen Milroe, and maybe he'll never be a Steeler, and that's fine. But it looks like somebody is willing to take this guy in the first round. I don't think that you should. And if you want more of a breakdown on Milroe, check out the episode from a couple weeks ago that I did with Cody Williams from FanSided.com, talking about the quarterback options, and we both revealed our top 10 quarterbacks in this year's NFL draft. Milroe certainly wasn't in my top 3. So I think that would be a big mistake if that is what the Steelers are doing. If the Steelers are the ones that are interested in Milroe in the first round, I think any team that takes him, it's potentially a mistake, but particularly the Steelers with how they're operating as a win now franchise right now, which I've said I disagree with. I fundamentally disagree with the way the Steelers are operating this offseason and for the past multiple off seasons from a team building perspective, because there is not the foundation of a Super Bowl roster here. And if you don't have a Super Bowl quarterback, why are you continuing to strive to win 9 games every year? Because it makes it borderline impossible to get that quarterback. So taking a big swing on Milroe is something that I don't necessarily hate in a vacuum if you're just desperate to find a ceiling raising quarterback. But when it is lumped together with a move like trading for DK Metcalf, who's going to want somebody to instantly produce with him, then that makes me question how you're operating as a franchise. And if you understand how fickle championship windows are in the NFL, it's hard to put together a championship roster, and you need a lot of things to come together, especially if you don't have a Patrick Mahomes, a Josh Allen, a Lamar Jackson. You need a lot of things to come together at the same time and be on the right timeline. And the Steelers are not operating in that fashion. And if Pittsburgh is the team interested in Milroe in the first round, it would just be another example of that. We're going to be a little bit shorter today, but I do have something more for you other than just some Jalen Milroe talk. And I want to focus on that first round pick, number 21, that the Steelers have, and what they could potentially do with it. And this stems from Omar Khan in recent days stating, quote, "Our goal is always to put ourselves in a position where we don't have to take a guy at a specific position." Now we know his predecessor did not operate this way, and we also know that Mike Tomlin has a big hand in the draft process for the Steelers, and he certainly doesn't operate this way. The Steelers often overdraft players because they have a need at that position. Think Terrell Edmonds, think Artie Burns, think Najee Harris, think Kenny Pickett. There are plenty of examples. And last year, the Steelers definitely had a clear need at tackle, and Omar Khan was able to trade up to get Broderick Jones or to get Troy Fautanu. My apologies. Traded up for Broderick Jones the year prior. Um, but there are needs on this team. That's not the position the Steelers are in. First and foremost, there is a need at quarterback. A big time need at quarterback. And the options that the Steelers are going to have access to in the first round that are potentially talked about as first round guys, Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe, I'm not interested in either guy as a first rounder. I'm barely interested in Shedeur Sanders as a true first round guy. I don't know that the ceiling is there. And I've actually seen mocks recently where Sanders, who for a while has been talked about as a top 3-4 pick, slides all the way to the Steelers. And if that happened and the Steelers took Shedeur Sanders, I would be happy with that because I think you're getting much better value than a top 5 pick. But I have real questions about his athletic ceiling as a quarterback. And I think so many other things need to hit right when you don't have the high end athleticism. So Sanders I would be okay with it because I think he's certainly more pro ready than Milroe or Dart. But I think there's a ceiling on that arm. I think there's a ceiling on his athletic profile. Um, so, and I don't think he's going to be there at 21. So likely the Steelers, if they're looking to address their need at quarterback, are going to be deciding between Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart. And this entire exercise of the Steelers' needs and the potential options in the first round, which I'm going to lay out to you, is to say there are a lot of other holes in this roster and a lot of better options than the options at quarterback. So I don't think the Steelers should draft a quarterback in the first round. I've never thought that. I remain steadfast in that. And hopefully if you do think the Steelers should go in that direction, maybe I can sway you here. So to me, the Steelers' biggest need outside of quarterback is along the interior defensive line. Right now, on the roster, the Steelers have Montravius Adams, Keanu Benton, Dominique Davis, Daniel Ekuwale, Cameron Hayward, Logan Lee, Isaiah Loudermilk, Dean Lowry, Azezi Otomowo, and Jacob Slade. And notice that I struggled with a couple of those names. It's because you don't hear them on Sundays very often. Really, the Steelers have Cam Hayward and they have Keanu Benton as potential foundational guys. And Cam Hayward is about to turn 36. And yes, he was a first-team All-Pro last year, and he was fantastic. But Benton is the only future building block along the defensive line. And this year's draft is loaded along the defensive line. The potential options in the first round, among others, if the Steelers, want to reach back into guys that are more viewed as consensus second-round picks. But these guys, Derek Harmon, Kenneth Grant, and Walter Nolan, are all guys that I would love the Steelers to come away from the first round with. Harmon is more of the penetrator, pass rusher guy, 3 technique on the inside, who's going to be much more disruptive. Grant, you're going to put him at the nose much more often and allow Hayward not to play the nose and Benton not to play the nose, which I think would be a positive all around for that entire defensive line. And Grant is an absolute freak of an athlete. He's less disruptive. He's less refined as a pass rusher, but as a run stuffer, he is one of the best players in this draft. And I think the Steelers should probably look to prioritize stopping the run because that's been a big issue for years and years now for the Steelers, and they got steamrolled by Derrick Henry in the playoffs last year. So I think Kenneth Grant would be a great option, and Walter Nolan is another more disruptive guy. He was the cream of the crop in his recruiting class, a bona fide 5-star guy. He's always had that level of talent. There were a few more questions maybe about his motor potentially, but all three guys are excellent options and much better than the idea of drafting Jalen Milroe or Jackson Dart. Let's look at running back as I list a bunch of guys, but I think this is a good exercise. The Steelers have a big need at running back. Jaylen Warren is really the only guy that has played. Kenneth Gainwell as well, but those are the only two that have played meaningful snaps in the NFL. Evan Hull, Cordero Patterson, he has, but is not going to anymore. Aaron Shampklin and Jonathan Ward. Really, it's just Jaylen Warren that I feel excited about in that backfield, and there are a bunch of great options at running back in this draft. In the first round, Ashton Genty will likely be gone when the Steelers are picking at 21, but these guys probably won't. Amarion Hampton, Travion Henderson, and Caleb Johnson. I love all three of them. I like Hampton the most, I believe. I need to still finalize some things as I dig into the draft more and more. Hampton just a hyper explosive back and has some size too, which I would like to pair with Warren. Warren's a physical runner, but I really would like the combination of size and explosiveness that Hampton would provide. And he did a lot of his damage in a zone scheme at North Carolina, which I think is really valuable when you're potentially going to play for Arthur Smith. And that would be a home run pick for me, honestly. Drafting Amarion Hampton in the first round, while there was a lot of discussion about first round running backs, I think this would be a better pick than drafting quarterback because I know you're going to get a good player here. And no, it's not going to necessarily put a Super Bowl ceiling on this team, but if you can get a run game, then you're just continuing to build the ecosystem for whatever quarterback you bring in, be it the guy from Green Bay in New York, or Mason Rudolph, or a mid-round quarterback that eventually, gets some starting reps, or someone next year. Travion Henderson there have been some Jahmyr Gibbs comparisons. I don't think he's quite as dynamic as Gibbs, but that undersized speed threat can be a bit of a jitterbug, but I think, he's more impressive in terms of his speed than his quickness, but has both in spades. And the Steelers need explosiveness, especially out of the run game. And that's proving to be more and more valuable in the NFL, right? Ben Johnson recently talked about how passing game EPA is the most important stat for determining wins and losses. You still do need a run game, but I think what more and more teams are looking for in the run game is just how you generate explosives from it. So a guy like Travion Henderson, while it would be a bit rich for me to see the Steelers take him at 21, I think that's a trade back situation, but absolutely, I would love it. And then Caleb Johnson, he didn't run as well, running back out of Iowa, Hampton out of North Carolina, Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, again, kind of a bigger back, a zone back like Amarion Hampton, who has some breakaway speed. He didn't run as well in his 40, but on tape, he can really run away from guys. And he's a physical back, and he's just very smooth, really smooth runner. Again, that's one I'd want to trade back a little bit for, but still would be a better option than the quarterback options there. And then let's speed through these last two because I don't know that these are where the Steelers would really be considering going in the first round. But wide receiver, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden III, would like all of these options, again, better than the quarterback options. Golden, maybe just because of the fit where I see him, mostly as a vertical threat. He's played a lot out of the slot, and I know he can win and beat press and win on inbreakers and outbreakers, but I think he did most of his damage at Texas. I know he did a lot of his damage at Texas as a vertical threat, and I just don't think that makes much sense to pair with Pickens and Metcalf. But Egbuka, who just a really smooth and reliable guy out of the slot, who was hyper reliable for multiple seasons at Ohio State, I think that would be a great third receiver to pair with the two that the Steelers have. And then he could easily become your number two when you inevitably move on from George Pickens after this season. I think that's implicit in any plan where the Steelers spend a premium pick on a wide receiver this year, is the fact that this is probably Pickens' last season in Pittsburgh. And I think that was a big part of the DK Metcalf trade. And then Luther Burden, he has been kind of falling through the draft process in a long-term sense heading into this season. He was seen as a potential top 10 guy. He was one of the best receivers in college football 2 years ago. He was much less productive this past year, but the types of plays he can make with the ball in his hands would make him interesting to me for the Steelers, because I just don't know that a run after the catch guy is on the roster the way that Luther Burden is. So I would be interested there. And then cornerback is another need for the Steelers, and Jahdae Barron, Will Johnson, both are likely going to be gone. So I don't love the options there. I don't love the idea of drafting a corner, especially after spending on Darius Slay, very old, and you need a long-term answer opposite Joey Porter Jr. But I don't know that in the short term a first-round pick makes much sense. So ranking those position groups by talent, by need, and kind of compiling it all together for where the Steelers should look in the first round. Interior defensive line is number one for me. There are no questions about it. Even if you go beyond the group of guys that I mentioned, you can get to a lot of great defensive linemen, right? Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, and Derek Harmon are the three I see likely the Steelers able to draft. But you also have Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State, Alfred Collins out of Texas, Deion Walker, who's probably not a first-round guy, or Darius Alexander. You get a little bit further, no longer first-round guys, but I think this class is loaded in the interior defensive line. Running back, the class I know for a fact is loaded beyond Genty, Henderson, Hampton, Caleb Johnson, even Quinshon Judkins, Dylan Sampson, potential second-round guys. Yes, a lot of me listing names, but to the end of the Steelers should not draft a quarterback in the first round of this draft. There are not enough talented first-round quarterbacks in this class. So don't reach on one again, because if you do, you're going to put yourself in a position where you're likely not going to draft one next year when it's looking, we say this every year, but it's looking like a much more talented class next year. And if you draft someone this year, even if he doesn't really work out, or even if he doesn't play much, you're boxing yourself into at least 2 years of experiment. And I don't think anyone in this class is worth taking yourself off the board of getting a long-term franchise quarterback for, maybe the next 1 or 2 draft cycles or free agencies. So I don't know that the Steelers are the ones telling the NFL that they value Milroe as a first-round guy. I don't know how Milroe got that NFL draft invite, but if it is the Steelers, that's a big problem. I think that would be a massive mistake. And there are just so many other options in the first round and other ways to spend their first round pick that I think would be, would better serve the franchise long term. This is all about timelines, and the Steelers aren't willing to do a full rebuild. So you have to retool in an intelligent way. And I think spending a pick in the 20s again on a quarterback that consensus is not a first rounder is just, we've already learned it with Kenny Pickett, but it's obviously not a way to get out of the purgatory the Steelers are in. So I really hope they don't go in that direction. And I really hope they do draft a defensive lineman or even a running back. I would like that better than reaching on one of these quarterbacks and boxing yourself in. Shorter show for me today. If you couldn't tell, I'm a little stuffed up. I'm a little under the weather, but we're able to do it. I'm happy to be able to do it after missing last week, especially. More draft content that we'll be hitting all the draft stuff leading up to it. Tommy and Shane on Wednesdays. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. We really appreciate your support. Subscribe everywhere you get your podcast to the Still Curtain podcast. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to it. And I know they appreciate everyone that joins them on Wednesdays at 1:30. So check out their fantastic show and check out stillcurtain.com for Tommy and Shane and all their great contributors on that site. Their great content heading into the 2025 NFL draft. We're getting close to it. It's going to be an exciting day and maybe a transformative one for the Steelers, especially if they're looking to add to the quarterback room. And we're also on Aaron Rodgers watch still. So keep an eye out for everything, all those places, and stay subscribed so you can get all your content immediately if that Aaron Rodgers news eventually breaks. Have a good one. I'll talk to you next week. And until next week, go Steelers.